On this week's Community Wednesday, we're breaking down the stats of the MG34 and showing you the most effective way to run it. When I saw this suggestion, I knew this was going to be a challenge because the MG34 isn't really that mobile. Getting the stats is never an issue, but coming up with a build that still gives you decent numbers in the end, that's not always the easiest thing to do. I remember having a lot of fun in multiplayer using this with a hipfire build, but as we know, a lot of things in multiplayer don't really translate over to Warzone. So the next logical step was to make a long range build, except there's one problem. You can't put 6 attachments that are necessary to make this thing into a long range build. Unless of course, you don't mind having an ADS time slower than even the slowest sniper rifles. So, medium range it is. Let's get into the build. This build will look like a pretty typical long range setup. That means we got the monolithic suppressor, the longest barrel, so the FSS Brute, the tac laser, the VLK, and the largest magazine available. So let's get into the stats, starting with mobility. Its ADS time is pretty terrible at 490 milliseconds. This means that it's better than a sniper rifle, but worse than a marksman rifle. Its reload speed is also really bad, and unlike most guns, it doesn't matter if you leave one bullet in the magazine. It's gonna take just as long to reload. But at least you have a 100 round magazine to kind of make up for that extremely long reload. Its movement and sprint speeds though are literally the worst out of anything I've tested in this game, and I've tested the Riot Shield and launchers. The ADS strike speed is also really bad, but you're probably going to be wanting to mount or go prone when you use this anyways. Its sprint out and tactical sprint out time are also extremely bad, but you're not going to be sprinting out with this thing anyways because you're not going to be running around the map with it, right? Its stability though is actually really great. Its velocity isn't the greatest, which actually surprised me, but it is doable for medium to long range. And its rate of fire at 14.2 rounds per second, absolutely amazing. So when you add up all the points, you get a total mobility score of 24, which isn't that great, but if you can see what's good about this, you can see that this is min-maxing basically your killing potential. So the biggest reason that I don't recommend this as a long range weapon is because of its recoil. You can see though that the vertical recoil can be pretty easily controlled, but that side to side bounce, it's impossible to predict and control. Thankfully, the longer you hold the trigger, the easier the recoil gets to control. But you only have 100 rounds in this mag and the reload time is not that great, so you don't want to be wasting too much ammo. And while you technically could swap out that tac laser for something like the Commando foregrip, at that point, your ADS time would be as slow as most sniper rifles, if not slower, and your non-existent mobility will be tanked even more. Taking into consideration all of these things, this build gets a recoil score of 36. Now for damage, you can already see that this is mostly green, and we haven't had scores like these since the pre-patch FFAR. If you manage to connect all your shots, this thing will shred most things before they even realize they've been hit. Above 44 meters, this gun does something pretty interesting. Its upper torso and lower torso / limb damage do have different values, but their time to kill is the same. So it'll be extremely consistent and very forgiving at longer ranges. And this build gets a total damage score of 95. Now when we add up all the scores, we get a total of 155. This build score is extremely high, but don't let that fool you. This is entirely because of that insane damage score. At this point, you may be thinking, why not just try to improve mobility and forget about medium to long range in general? Well, I had thought of that too, and I actually wanted to do a hipfire build, except I ran into a problem that, even with stacked attachments, this thing isn't mobile enough to compete with SMGs or even assault rifles at close range. It's just way too sluggish. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into how to use this build, what its strengths are, and its weaknesses. In my testing and playtime with this weapon, I found 2 effective ways to use this build. The first method is to use ambush tactics. You want to place yourself in front of where the enemy is going to be, and as soon as they are in your line of sight, just open fire, and even if they see you, it's going to be too late for them. This build excels at ambush tactics. Basically, you use a secondary weapon to get yourself from point to point. You set up, either mounted or just crouched ready to go, and then you just pop up already ADS and just delete anything that comes into your line of sight. Just make sure that you're hitting every shot, and if you're dealing with a team, make sure you don't have to reload. The second way to use this is to treat it almost like a sniper rifle. So you'll be running around the map with something like the bullfrog, but whenever you see an enemy around 30 meters or further, you're gonna pull your MG34 out and you're just gonna gun them down. So running it like this, let's say you start being shot at, so you take cover and you bring out your MG34 and you pop out. Even if you both shoot each other at the exact same time, there's a very low chance that the other person is gonna win that fight because your TTK is gonna be that much better. So if you notice a pattern, basically, find a way to move as little as possible when you use this thing without obviously putting yourself out in the open in the middle of the field. The MG34's greatest strength is putting out an insane amount of damage in an extremely short amount of time. And if the enemy has one or no plates, you'll be gunning them down faster than the average human reaction time. So a downside other than the mobility is its recoil. Even with its great TTK, and even if you were to single fire, you can't effectively deal with people head glitching at 80 plus meters. If you're tap firing, that's going to give the enemy enough time to duck away and either plate up or wait for their health to regen. So in squad-based modes, even though it has an extremely long reload time, this may actually be worth using. In trios and quads, you can pretty much always guarantee that one of your squad mates will be able to cover you while you reload. Although if used right, you should only be having to reload after the battle is over. But there's always the chance of being third-partied, which is why I don't recommend it for solos and duos. Your teammate may also need a reload, or even if they don't, trying to hold off two people by yourself isn't always the easiest thing to do. And for solos, if you get third-partied, there's now a chance that you're probably going to be missing part of your plate. So unless you get really lucky and the enemy doesn't push you, you're pretty much going to lose the fight before even being able to participate in it. But in the squad-based modes, even if you use it as just a normal medium range weapon, as long as you swap to another weapon while moving, you're going to be having a pretty good time. And your teammates will too, because as long as you're hitting all your shots, you're going to be winning a lot more fights and saving a lot more plates. And they can say thanks by watching your back when you reload. So what do you think about the MG34? Would you use it despite its extremely slow movement? Or do you think its TTK is not worth that trade-off? Me, personally, after all this testing and the few hours that I used to get a feel for it, I won't be using it. But I wouldn't mind if one of my squad mates used one as a secondary. And remember, this is a community Wednesday, meaning these videos are your videos. I only make these videos when you guys ask for them specifically. So if you got any topic, question, or idea that you want me to cover next week, please let me know in the comments down below or on Instagram. But that's the video. If you enjoyed it or has helped you in any way, please hit like. If you got any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below. And if you want to make sure that you never miss another video, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.